Hey there, Blue Table fans. It's time to talk about Warhammer Fantasy. A while back I did a little bit about good armies for beginners, and I thought I would do the same thing for Warhammer Fantasy. This is going to be with a twist, which is that Warhammer Fantasy really is a lot more complicated, and I guess not so cut and dried as some of the 40K lists are, where, you know, there's some pretty straightforward builds and strategies. The other thing is, it's just plain more, it's probably 20 to 30% more difficult and expensive to build a Warhammer Fantasy army. Now, there are some exceptions to this. There are some armies that are a very low model count and a lot less expensive. So effectively the range encompasses both easier and harder than the easiest and hardest armies in 40K in terms of the expense and effort to build physically the army. So let's get cracking. We'll start with my favorites, which are the elves. You have wood elves, dark elves, and high elves. The wood elves are definitely one of the lowest model count armies, and they, you know, a build typically is 4 heroes, mostly mages. That's the lowest model count, most effective one that I've seen is basically 4 wizards. Of course, in 8th edition it's by percentage, but it's more or less the same thing. You put in archers, glade riders, really fast elements, 2 treemen, a unit of dryads as troubleshooters, and amazingly that can come up to about 2,000 points, just those few things, because the treemen are somewhere between 250 and 300 points. So, you know, there's a good quarter of the army just with those 2 models, and there's tons of, you know, possibilities there. In fact, you could probably build a tree man literally out of sticks and twine out of the backyard. I mean, if you're really ambitious, maybe green stuff a face on there and you're set. There's lots of alternate models to use too. My favorite is using the megalith from Privateer Press. That's not cheaper really, but it looks really good. And so you've got Dark Elves, which are, in my opinion, the nastiest, trixiest army of the bunch. High Elves have tons of elites. They're kind of like the Eldar of the Warhammer fantasy world, and I guess Eldar arguably are space elves. Alright, now let's move on to humans. Okay, so for humans, you have the 2 good human armies, which are Bretonnians and Empire. Bretonnians are really... oh man, they are the toughest ones to paint, because each knight in the army, and there's a lot of knights in a typical army, has unique heraldry. Now, some people love that, you know, you can kind of make each guy his own separate thing. Me personally, I like to do a themed Bretonnian army where you use a unified color scheme and just variate the actual heraldry. Like you do everything green and white, or blue and white, or red and black. That was one of my favorites, red, black with white accents. And there's different like provinces that have different colors associated with them, which allows for a lot of thematic elements. But of course, would I recommend Bretonnians for a new player? Yeah, I would. They're pretty resilient, they're pretty straightforward to play. You can get a lot of variation on them with magic items, virtues, and that sort of thing. There is a variant of the Bretonnian army nicknamed the Flying Circus, which is basically, if you take your leader on a Pegasus, then you can take more units of Pegasus Knights, which is really can make for a good themed army. So then on to Empire. Empire's definitely, I would not recommend for a beginner. They are You know, you have to really paint a lot of figures. They can be good in a good general's hands. The Empire can be very effective, but they're certainly very complicated to organize all the different troops correctly. But if you do an Empire army, definitely start with 2 or 3 good, solid 25 to 30 man blocks of swordsmen. Swordsmen are really where you want to look for your meat and potatoes of the Empire army. Alright, let's talk about dwarfs. There are technically 2 different dwarf armies for Warhammer Fantasy, and that's the regular dwarfs and the Chaos Dwarfs. Now the Chaos Dwarfs haven't had an army update for like 14 years or something like that. There is an independent army book out for them that's available online. That is really highly respected, probably not going to be allowed in tournaments, but most informal groups would probably allow it just because it's been so well written and it has sort of that air of officiality to it. Our group has allowed that list, and I've actually been recently tempted to play it. Chaos Dwarfs, though, are tough on either count because the models are discontinued. They're very expensive. You can convert them, but boy, you are looking at a lot of conversion work. You know, at least 50 to 70 models worth of specialty conversion work. So definitely not a beginner's army. Dwarfs, on the other hand, are an excellent beginner's army. They're low model count, they are easy to paint, and they can be just as effective as any other army. Note on dwarfs, they really consist of slow-moving but tough infantry, and then lots and lots of war machines. Now, in 8th edition, and I'll talk about this probably in another segment, all the armies change a little bit because you get they've changed it from choices, like you have a certain number of slots, to percentages. And so that means some races can take more or less of things that they would typically take. So yeah, dwarfs are great. Get your hands on the Battle for Skull Pass set. You can go on eBay and find lots and lots of you know, where they split that set up into 2 parts, and those are really cheap. So dwarfs really are a good beginning army in my estimation. Okay, I've forgotten about another human army that I just kind of skipped over, and that is Warriors of Chaos. These are the evil chaos-influenced humans, and they are, I would say, a very good beginning army because you can grow and adapt with them by adding different marks or magic items or making your sorcerer a different type. They're resilient, they're low model count, and they're relatively easy to paint. I believe Warriors of Chaos are going to get a boost in the new edition. Because of reasons that I will tell you later. Well, I'll just tell you now. They've changed the game just a little bit from a game of winning combats by combat resolution, i.e. not so much about actually killing things, to a game that is a little bit more about just killing things. Like in 8th edition, because 2 ranks can fight, and you take off casualties from the back rather than the front. In other words, you can't peel off the front rank and they don't get to hit back. It becomes less a game about getting the charge and having higher initiative and having enough ranks and combat resolution, static combat resolution, to actually win the battle, even though you took some casualties. And it becomes more a game of actually inflicting casualties. And this is where the Warriors of Chaos, I believe, will really come into their own, because they have very reasonably costed infantry that can really hit hard, i.e. the Warriors of Chaos. And a lesser extent the Marauders. Point for point, they are a really good deal. And another way the infantry got a boost in 8th edition, see, here now I'm talking about this, is that charging for a unit that moves 4 inches is no longer 4 inches plus 4 inches for the charge. It's 4 inches plus 2d6, average of 7 inches. That is an enormous difference in the game. It really made infantry get just a gigantic boost in their effectiveness. Add on top of that fighting extra rank if you're 10 wide. Now you got to be looking at armies where you can have masses of troops in 3 ranks, i.e. 10 wide, 3 or 4 deep. And I think that's where you're going to end up seeing a lot of carnage.